Hi, hello everyone. So last time we left off with blur effect, and this time we're going to do bloom effect, and this will be our last part of this series. And with that, let's go and try to implement it. So what is bloom effect, and how does it play with the blur effect? Well, the bloom effect, if you take a look at the Wikipedia article, you can see this kind of image here, which is basically extracting and then bleeding these colored parts, or right, these bright parts. It's essentially bleeding further into the scene. And how do you do that? Well, you combine kind of blur. You try to extract the bright region, combine it with blur to get that effect. And this is a article I would recommend. Sorry about this. I would recommend this. Well, basically, this advanced light bloom reading from Learn OpenGL, and you can see a bloom effect here, right? It tries to extract the bright regions and then essentially does a blur pass, and you get this kind of like really bright regions. And how does it work? Well, basically here, as an example, you can see the scene and then the scene, but only with bright regions, and then you blur them and then you combine them. So that's sort of how it works. You're going to see when we start implementing how it will actually work. But for that, we need to render the two color attachments, right? Usually you just render the scene texture, but the kicker is you can also render two other textures. You don't have to limit yourself to one texture, and that's what we're going to learn here. So let's get started. So for that, first of all, we need to set up our renderer to actually be able to render the two textures. So I'm going to go here in our engine, and just I usually have to zoom in a bit because the font is too small. All right. When you're in engine, what we already had previously, you can see this render path descriptor, and you say here, okay, use this color attachment, right? But we're not going to use only one color attachments. We're going to use two color attachments. And for the second one, we can add it if it exists, and I'm going to do it like, well, let's just assume that we always have a second texture. So I'm going just to create empty texture because we're going to use it. So you can just name it destination texture 2, right? Doesn't matter. So in initialize, we're just going to create empty texture here. So this destination texture 2 is this create this, what was it called, texture, sorry, texture 2D. What did I call it? Yeah, it's create empty texture. So we just need to import it, or was it texture? Alright, it's texture, and then we just need to await it. So it will be await, right? Texture, create empty texture, and then we just paste some parameters, and at the end we're just going to say this. What's the problem with it? Oh, it's not GPU texture here, it's actually texture. So we're just going to say destination texture 2, it's of type texture, and then create an empty texture. Alright, that's it. And now we can actually use the second color attachment. So we're going to say here, we're going to render the second one. So we can leave all these parameters, but instead of this texture view, right? This is from the canvas texture usually, right? As you can see here from the context, let's get current texture, that's from the canvas. But here we're going to use this destination texture to create view. We're going to create a view for it. And then how do we actually output to the second texture, right? So we're going to go to our shader, which was for our sprites, and we're going to use the second location. You can see location 0 here. We're going to use the second one. So let's do just that now, and then let's just create some struct. Let's call it fragment out. So at location 0 we have color, and I mentioned that this second texture is going to be brightness texture. So we can say brightness vector 4f, and here we have color. So let's just leave texture color as is. So now we're also going to have this struct that I mentioned. So we're going to have out, fragment out. So our out color is texture color. So, and that sorts the texture one. And for the second out parameter, we're actually going to test for the brightness. And how can we do that? Well, you can use not the fragment data. This is wrong. We're actually going to use texture color XYZ. And then we're going to test it against some values, and I use these values here, which will give us our brightness. If you followed my grayscale video, I mentioned this, but you can actually get the brightness of a texture by dot product or just averaging out. You can do XYZ plus and then over 3, or you can use some values to actually extract the brightness or luminance. So I would encourage you to read about that as well. But then we can say here, we can just create some constant. Let's say brightness threshold, type vector, and I'm going to use 0.4. If our luminance, our brightness, is above the threshold, what are we outputting? Well, we're going to say out brightness, and here, this is obviously wrong. We're going to use our texture color, else we're just going to output black. And I'm just going to use texture color alpha because I ran into issues with that. And that's basically it. Okay, I forgot here. It's not just texture color. We actually have to multiply with the input fragment, right? Because we had this tint. So we're going to do that and we're going to return out. All right. So let's just see our game. Is it running? So of course it's broken because one last thing that we need to do is we also have when we're creating sprite renderer, sprite pipeline, which was used to render sprites, we also have to specify those color attachments. So I'm going to find it somewhere here probably. Here, when you create a fragment state, so you can just copy paste this whole target probably. Almost. Let's see. What did I do wrong? That should have been it. Okay, I'm rendering the effect still. Let's just disable effects for now. I'm going to remove this. I'm going to do this, comment this out. All right. Okay, it's just a shader issue somewhere. Let's fix that shader. So for that, let's see what the issue is. In shader vector 4f unexpected line 35. Just syntax error. All right, almost there. L is greater than brightness threshold. Return out. Okay, I need to specify time returning fragment out, and it kind of works. Perfect. All right, let's just see what we did here. So I'm going to go to inspect. So I had WebGPU debugger installed. Will it pick it up? It did. So if I look at the textures now, somewhere here, or better yet in frames. So do I see second color attachment? I don't see second color attachment. Weirdly enough, let's just see in our textures. Here it is. So here the brightness extract, right? So the point of this texture is, right, these are the bright regions that pass our test. Which test? Well, this test exactly here, right? If L is greater than brightness threshold, we use the texture color. So these are brighter regions, and then the darker regions are just black. So that's how it works. It's really simple, really straightforward, especially compared to WebGL, I have to say. And so now we're going to do our shaders and then combine all of that to make our bloom effect. So for that, we're going to first of all create a bloom effect. Bloom effect shader. But first, let's just create shader bloom effect and the WGSL. So for that, it's going to look like, what's it's going to look like? It's going to be similar to texture combine probably, so we can fetch that and then copy it to bloom effect, and then we're going to modify it. So we're going to need position texture coordinates, that's all right. We have two textures, that's quite all right as well. So mix value, we don't need it. So we can get rid of that. We can get our screen texture. So this is going to be bloom texture or blur texture, even better. Blur texture. Actually, it's going to be brightness blur texture. So just some precision. This is our brightness blur texture. All right. So how do we blur it? Well, so what I'm going to do here is dampen color, and I'm going to say to do, because I'm going to do that later. But here we can just add those two together. So we can do a screen texture .rgb plus bloom texture, or should I just use RGB here? Let's leave here. So we're going to use RGB or XYZ, whatever you prefer, and then here we can just set up brightness blur texture. So nothing yet, because we're obviously not using effect. So let's go and implement it. And for that, which am I going to copy actually? Let me just think for a second. I had something ready. Actually, we can also use, what was it, texture combine, texture effect. Let's fetch that one and then copy it to bloom effect. And here, let's start re-implementing some stuff. So screen texture bind group is fine. Actually, we can scene is probably better name, so I'm going to use scene, but you can use whichever you prefer. Scene texture bind group. Alright, we need that. So we need our second texture, so that's going to be brightness. Brightness texture, and then brightness texture bind group. This layout we don't need. Mix value we do not need. So let's start rid of that. Combine texture bind group. We didn't rename it, so we're just going to use this. Set combine texture. Do we need it actually? No, we don't need this. Sorry. So let's see scene texture. And then we can also say this brightness texture. Similarly, just create it. Parameters are same. So it's just an empty texture. Mix value buffer, get rid of it. Sorry about this, but going from the beginning, it's going to be annoying. So if you'll get lost in here, please do check GitHub. So that's source of truth here. So we had this bind group layout. So brightness, texture bind. Sorry, what was it? Exactly. So you can say brightness texture bind group. No, this is layout. We don't need the second layout. We don't need this as well. So just leave texture bind group layout, then scene texture bind group. That's quite alright. And then we can get rid of this mix value bind group, and then we're going to copy this scene texture bind group, and we're just going to rename this brightness texture bind group. And this must be brightness texture, and this as well. So you need two bind groups for two textures, but one layout, right? Because the layout doesn't specify anywhere the texture used. Okay, here, so we have group 1, and then we can specify layout again for group 1, sorry, group 0, group 1. So we're creating a pipeline. This is quite alright, this is quite alright. And I think we're almost done. We're going to get rid of this, so we don't have mix value here. And this is brightness texture bind group. Okay. Okay, I think that's almost it. We just need to rename this to bloom effect. Then we need to create it from our effects factory. From is not blur, rather it's bloom effect. And I haven't renamed it, probably. Classic, it's not texture effect, it's bloom effect. I always forget that. Okay, bloom effect, just say bloom effect, import it, then go to our main. And here, get rid of this horizontal vertical stuff. Here we create bloom effect, and then we can use it. And here we're going to use to render scene to scene texture, the texture. All right. Something is missing. Let's see. So it hasn't kicked off yet. Let me just check if I'm using it correctly. So I'm going to say screen texture dot red is 2.0. Okay, that's correct. Brightness blur texture. I think it might be correct. All right. It's actually being used. It's just that brightness is not that bright. Aha! My bad. I never assigned second texture here, so we need to say engine set destination texture 2, right? It's not just 1 anymore. So we're going to do that in our engine. So we had this set destination texture somewhere, so we can say public set destination texture 2 texture. We can paste texture to it. Or we can also say here GPU texture instead. Or now. All right. So let's change this. Let's just fetch texture from here so that it's similar to what we had previously. And then here we can just say create view. Everything works. And let's just say GPU texture. All right. We did set that up, and now we just need to pass this destination texture too. And it's not seen, rather it's, I need to expose it. Sorry for jumping so much, but Alright, now it works. You can already see these bright regions. Here, as I mentioned, if you get lost because there is a lot of jumping, it is what it is. Just please refer to GitHub documentation. So now finally, we're going to dampen the effect later, but we now have to do this blur effect all over. And for that, I'm just going to do easy thing and copy paste again. So I would encourage you to refactor this stuff. I'm going to make, next video is going to be outro. I'm going to discuss some stuff that we did and how can you improve it. But for now, I'm just going to, as always, just copy paste stuff. And I'm just going to call this bloom blur effect. I'm going to do lazy thing here, going to copy blur effect to bloom blur effect. And let's just rename it here before I forget. And most of the stuff can remain the same. We're just going to get rid of stuff that we do not care about. So let's, first things first, we're not going to do this horizontal pass we had. So we're going to say here horizontal command encoder. Okay, just rename it. And then let's see my notes. Yeah, so we can just rename this to horizontal pass encoder. Make sure that you're inside of horizontal pass. I just want to rename these groups. It's going to be easier because we're going to get rid of this do vertical and do horizontal pass, vertical command encoder and vertical pass encoder. So let's get rid of this, and all of this is vertical now. Let's get rid of this horizontal stuff. Let's get rid of these booleans as well. The horizontal, we don't need that. What else am I going to fix? So, all right, we have these pipelines, that's quite all right. We have texture, and I'm going to rename, I'm going to completely delete horizontal pass texture, and I'm going to rename this to ping pong texture. You're going to see why. And then for the bind groups, we do need ping pong bind group. So we're going to need that, but horizontal, no, we're going to get rid of this. So we're going to need two pipelines and then this idea of ping pong texture. So here, get render texture, are we even going to have it? No, we don't care about it. It's going to work a bit differently. We can get rid of this horizontal and this horizontal bind group. So for our horizontal pass, here we can get rid of this. So where are we going to render first? Well, the idea is first we're going to render to ping pong texture that we have, and we can just create view. And the ping pong texture is going to be our source of second pass. So I'm going to explain it soon. But let's just see. So we can rename this texture to apply effect 2. And what's that going to be? Well, that's going to be our brightness texture. And the second argument here, texture to apply effect 2, bind group. So we're going to paste that bind group, and that's going to go here as our source, right? Because this represents our source texture. It goes into shader as a bind group, and we render to this ping pong texture, our first base, right? And then we're going to use that ping pong texture as a source via this ping pong bind group, and then we're going to render to our final texture. So With that said, that should work. I'm going to explain just quickly. So the idea is it should sort of work like, maybe I can remove this, go here. It should sort of work like this, right? So we have our scene, our, well, brightness texture, right? And that brightness texture is our source. Let's say here source. It goes into, where does it go? Well, we have this horizontal path, right? And where does the horizontal path render to? Well, to our ping pong texture, right? So ping pong texture is our destination. So here we had our brightness texture, then we applied here this horizontal blur, right? And then our texture has horizontal blur. But now we need to do vertical paths of our blur. If you remember from the last time, we had these two paths blur, horizontal and vertical. So this ping pong texture goes here as a source, right, into our vertical path. So you can say ping pong texture. And our destination texture is now here, right? We specify this as destination texture, so our brightness texture is destination. So the idea is, right, we do this crisscross so that our source texture, our brightness texture, does get horizontal path, and then it also does get vertical path. So then it can be used further in bloom effect. So that's sort of how it works, and hopefully it will work now. So we just now have to check if it's going to work. For that, we can go to our bloom effect. In our bloom effect, we're just going to create here private blur effect of type bloom blur effect. So we need to create it, initialize it. This blur effect is new bloom blur effect, then initialize it. And then here we can use it actually. So this blur effect dot draw, what are we passing? Where? The brightness texture with, and then brightness texture bind group. Right? You can sort of already assume that it works, but if I do this multiple times, you can already see this kind of brightness effect, right, that we have a bit over the player. So I think I had, from the last time, I had a bit of bug in our blur shader. So if you go to blur, here in for loop, you will see 4, but we actually had 5 here. So this should be 5, and this should be 5. If I save, and you can already see this kind of blur. You will experience some slowness at the beginning, so that's because we're creating a lot of resources in our draw. So you can get away with it, optimize it a bit further, but I'm going to leave it as it is because it's not super important. I'm going to leave optimization to you, but you can already see that it works. We kind of have this, you can see this blur, and now we just need to dampen this a bit so that it's not so bright. So we can go to our bloom, and then in our bloom we can just dampen the color, and I believe it's a simple formula. We can just say our screen texture times equals vector 3f, so it's 1.0, and then here we need to clamp our brightness blur texture between 0 and 1. So you can say here vector 3, vector 1. Of course, I have a bug because I forgot to add this semicolon thingy. Oh, what is it now? Did I miss something? Brightness blur texture. There should be it. No? Let's see. Something in shader. Aha! I'm missing, of course. Alright. Now it looks correct. So basically that's it. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully it wasn't too hard, a lot of jumping, but please do check GitHub. And that's how you do bloom effect. So the idea was render to a separate texture, right? So we had in our shader, we had two outputs, right? Color and then brightness outputs. So we use that brightness. We apply blur a couple of times to brightness, and then you can apply this blur multiple times, right? You don't have to like do one blur effect. You can do as many as you want to exaggerate the effect as much as you want. 5 is usually good, but you can make it 10. And then you just combine those two texture and you get this bloom effect. So that's it for this video. There won't be next time because this is the end of series, and I'm going to announce soon the new series. So we're going to deal with 3D. I didn't want to continue on this one because there is a lot of code, and this is kind of already really good enough for simple 2D engine, which you can use and create yourself. And through this series, I would encourage you to take a look at the code, try to fix it, because I haven't been optimizing stuff. I haven't, well, let's just say the code isn't the cleanest on my side, so it's up to you to refactor it and to get that engine running. So if you like this video, please like, subscribe. You can also join the Discord channel for any additional questions, and until next time.